Picture this. You're born into unimaginable wealth, surrounded by silk and gold, served by hundreds of servants, yet you live in constant terror of the one day that will define your entire existence. Welcome to the nightmare reality of Ottoman princesses, where being born into royalty meant signing your own death warrant. The year is 1580, Constantinople. Behind the magnificent walls of Topkapi Palace, a young princess named Ayşe Sultan sits trembling in her chambers. Tomorrow is her wedding day, but unlike brides around the world, she's not nervous about flowers or dress fittings. She's terrified because Ottoman royal women had a 70% chance of dying within 5 years of marriage. Let that sink in. 7 out of 10 princesses would be dead before their 25th birthday. But why? What dark secrets lurked behind the opulent facade of the Ottoman Empire? What made these women, born into the most powerful dynasty on earth, fear their wedding night more than death itself? The answer lies in a twisted system of political marriages that treated royal women as nothing more than chess pieces in a deadly game of empire. These weren't just arranged marriages, they were calculated sacrifices, designed to maintain Ottoman supremacy, even if it meant destroying the lives of their own daughters. Let's journey back to the 16th century, the golden age of Ottoman power. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent rules over an empire stretching from Budapest to Baghdad, from Algeria to Armenia. His palace houses over 4,000 people, including dozens of princesses who live in what historians call the Golden Cage. A life of luxury that was actually a beautiful prison. Imagine waking up every morning knowing that your father, the Sultan, sees you not as his beloved daughter, but as a diplomatic tool. Your marriage isn't about love or even compatibility. It's about forging alliances, securing borders, or rewarding loyal servants. The men you'll marry might be 60 years older than you, already have multiple wives, or worse, be violently unstable. Princess Mihira Ma Sultan, daughter of Suleiman the Magnificent, was considered one of the most beautiful women in the empire. Poets wrote verses about her grace. Artists begged to paint her portrait. Yet, when she learned of her engagement to Grand Vizier Rustam Pasha, she locked herself in her chambers for 3 days, refusing food and water. Why? Because she knew that marriage meant leaving the protective walls of the palace forever, entering a world where her royal blood made her both powerful and incredibly vulnerable. The Ottoman marriage system was a labyrinth of betrayal and political maneuvering. Princesses were married to high-ranking officials, grand viziers, pashas, governors of distant provinces. These men gained enormous prestige from marrying into the royal family, but they also gained deadly enemies. Every political rival saw the princess as a weakness to exploit, a target to eliminate. Consider the fate of Princess Fatma Sultan, married to a provincial governor in 1590. Within 2 years of her wedding, she had survived 3 assassination attempts, lost 2 children to suspicious illnesses, and watched her husband execute his own brother on trumped-up treason charges. She wrote in a secret letter to her sister, "I dream of the palace walls every night, for I know I will never see them again. Marriage has made me a stranger in my own land." The wedding night itself carried unique terrors. Unlike other royal traditions where consummation was a private affair, Ottoman princesses faced a humiliating ritual called the verification. Palace officials, doctors, and witnesses would wait outside the bridal chamber, ready to examine evidence of the bride's virginity and the completion of the marriage. Failure to provide such proof could result in the marriage being annulled, bringing shame upon the entire royal family. But the physical humiliation was nothing compared to the psychological torment. These princesses had been raised in the harem, sheltered from all male contact except their fathers and brothers. Suddenly, they were expected to share intimate relations with a complete stranger, often a man old enough to be their grandfather, while knowing that dozens of people waited outside to judge their performance. Princess Esmayan Sultan, married at 14 to a 52-year-old pasha, described her wedding night in a diary found centuries later. "I felt as though I was being sacrificed to a beast. The man who claimed me knew nothing of gentleness, nothing of love, I was not a bride. I was a conquest, a prize to be claimed and displayed. The morning after brought no relief. As soon as the marriage was consummated, the princess became a target. Political enemies of her husband would plot her kidnapping or murder. Rival wives would poison her food or spread rumors of infidelity. Even her own servants, bought with enemy gold, might slip daggers between her ribs as she slept. The statistics are staggering. Of the 127 Ottoman princesses married between 1520 and 1750, only 38 lived to see their 30th birthday. 23 died in their first year of marriage. 41 died under mysterious circumstances that historians strongly suspect were assassinations. The rest succumbed to the stress, isolation, and constant fear that defined their married lives. Yet perhaps the cruelest twist was that these women understood their fate completely. They weren't naive children, stumbling blindly into danger. The Ottoman royal education system ensured that princesses were highly intelligent, multilingual, and politically astute. They could read the diplomatic correspondence about their own marriages, analyze the political ramifications, and calculate their own chances of survival with mathematical precision. Princess Ayşe Sultan, our trembling bride from the opening, had spent months studying the career of her intended husband, Damat Ibrahim Pasha. She knew he had been married twice before. Both previous wives had died young. She knew he had enemies in the Janissary Corps who had already made threats against his household. She knew that accepting this marriage was likely signing her own death warrant. But she also knew that refusing would mean execution for treason and possibly death for her mother and sisters as well. This was the impossible choice facing Ottoman princesses: certain death through refusal or probable death through compliance. Small wonder they spent their final nights as maidens weeping behind palace walls, knowing that their golden cage, for all its restrictions, had been the only safe harbor they would ever know. The tragedy deepens when we realize these weren't just individual stories of suffering, but a systematic destruction of the empire's most educated and capable women. Ottoman princesses received better educations than most European queens. They spoke multiple languages, studied mathematics and astronomy, wrote poetry, and understood complex political strategies. In any other society, they might have become rulers, scholars, or leaders. Instead, they became sacrificial offerings on the altar of imperial ambition. As dawn breaks over Constantinople and Princess Ayşe prepares for her wedding ceremony, she makes one final entry in her secret diary. Today I die, though I may live many more years. Today I cease to be Aish, daughter of the Sultan, and become property of a stranger. If anyone reads these words in years to come, remember that we were not just symbols or political tools. We were women with dreams, fears, and hopes. We deserved better than this golden grave they called marriage. The morning sun gleams off the minarets of the Blue Mosque as wedding preparations begin in earnest. But behind the celebration, behind the silk and jewelry and ceremonial splendor, lies a truth that the Ottoman court desperately wanted to hide. They were systematically destroying their own daughters in the name of political convenience. It's 1595, and Princess Ayşe Sultan's wedding day has arrived. But this isn't the fairy tale ceremony you might imagine. It's a carefully orchestrated nightmare that reveals the true horror of Ottoman royal marriage. Picture the scene. Topkapi Palace is decorated with thousands of flowers. The finest silks drape every surface, and the sound of traditional Ottoman music fills the air. Foreign ambassadors have traveled from across Europe to witness this spectacular display of imperial wealth. Yet if you look closely at the bride's face, you'll see something that chills the blood: the vacant stare of someone who has already accepted death. The Ottoman wedding ceremony was a 3-day ordeal that combined religious ritual with political theater. But for the princess, each moment brought her closer to a fate worse than execution. Let's walk through this wedding from hell, step by excruciating step. Day 1 began with the purification ritual, a ceremony so traumatic that several princesses attempted suicide rather than endure it. The bride was stripped and examined by the palace's chief medical officer to verify her virginity. This wasn't a gentle medical examination. It was a humiliating public verification conducted in front of the Sultan's mother, the chief eunuch, and several other court officials. The princess had to lie motionless while strangers examined her most intimate areas, declared her suitable for marriage, and sealed her fate with an official document. Princess Gevher Han Sultan, married in 1593, later wrote, "They examined me like livestock at market, discussing my body as though I weren't present. I prayed to Allah to strike me dead rather than endure such shame, but death would not come." Following this humiliation came the sorrow ceremony, a ritual where the princess formally said goodbye to her childhood and royal protection. She was required to kiss the hands of every person who had raised her, knowing she would likely never see them again. The palace wet nurses, the harem guards, the eunuchs, who'd been her only male friends, all received her tearful farewells while she tried to memorize their faces for the lonely years ahead. But the true psychological torture came with the Ift ceremony. The princess was presented with her dowry, chests full of gold, jewelry, silks, and rare treasures worth more than entire kingdoms. Each gift represented her value as a commodity, a price tag placed on her life. The more valuable the dowry, the more important the political alliance, and the more dangerous her future position would be. Aisha Sultan's dowry included 50,000 gold coins, enough silk to clothe an army, and a diamond necklace that had once belonged to Byzantine empresses. As each treasure was displayed, court officials calculated her worth like merchants at an auction. She later wrote, "Each gold coin felt like a nail in my coffin. The more valuable they declared me, the more certain I became that I would never survive my marriage." Day 2 brought the religious ceremony, and with it, the most heartbreaking moment in any Ottoman princess's life, the final conversation with her father, the Sultan. This wasn't a tender father-daughter moment filled with love and blessing. Instead, it was a cold, political briefing where the Sultan explained his daughter's duties as a diplomatic asset. Sultan Murad III's instructions to Princess Aisha were recorded by a court scribe and discovered in the palace archives. "You are no longer my daughter, but the empire's servant. Your husband's enemies are now your enemies. Your failure reflects upon our dynasty. You will bear sons to strengthen our bloodline, or you will be replaced. Your personal happiness is irrelevant to the empire's needs." Imagine being 16 years old and hearing your own father reduce you to a breeding tool and political weapon. Many princesses never spoke to their fathers again after this ceremony, considering them dead to their hearts. The religious ceremony itself was a mockery of Islamic marriage traditions. While Islam requires mutual consent from both bride and groom, Ottoman princesses had no choice in the matter. The imam performing the ceremony would ask for her consent, but refusing meant execution for treason. The choice was an illusion designed to satisfy religious law while maintaining political control. As the imam asked Princess Aisha if she accepted Damat Ibrahim Pasha as her husband, court records note that she remained silent for nearly 5 minutes. The entire ceremony ground to a halt as hundreds of guests waited to see if she would comply or choose death. Finally, barely audibly, she whispered, "I accept," words that sealed her doom. But day 3 brought the ultimate horror, the wedding night and its public verification. This wasn't simply about consummating the marriage. It was about publicly proving the princess's submission and the husband's dominance. The entire court would wait outside the bridal chamber, listening for sounds that confirmed the marriage's completion. The bridal chamber was prepared like an execution site. White sheets were specifically chosen to display evidence of virginity. Court physicians waited nearby to examine the physical proof. The bride was dressed in a white gown designed for easy removal, with no undergarments to complicate the process. She was essentially being prepared for ritualized rape with an audience. Princess Safiye Sultan, in her secret memoirs, described the experience. "I was led to that chamber like a lamb to slaughter. My husband spoke not a word of kindness, showed no gentleness. I was not a woman to be loved. but a territory to be conquered. When it was finished, they examined the sheets like battlefield trophies, while I lay bleeding and broken. The morning verification was the final humiliation. Court officials would enter the bridal chamber, examine the evidence of consummation, and announce their findings to the assembled court. Success meant the princess was now officially someone else's property. Failure, if no evidence could be found, meant the marriage was invalid, bringing shame upon the royal family that could result in the princess's execution. But even surviving the wedding night didn't guarantee safety. The new bride now faced what historians call the adjustment period, the first 6 months of marriage, when assassination attempts peaked. Political enemies saw this as the optimal time to strike, before the princess could establish her own network of allies and protectors. The statistical evidence is overwhelming. Of Ottoman princesses married between 1580 and 1600, 43% suffered violent attacks within their first 6 months of marriage. Poison was the preferred method, slow-acting toxins that could be disguised as natural illness. Princess Humayra Sultan survived 4 poisoning attempts in her first year of marriage, each one leaving her weaker and more paranoid than before. The psychological toll was devastating. These young women, raised in luxury and protection, suddenly found themselves in hostile environments where everyone around them might be a potential killer. They couldn't trust their food, their servants, or even their own husbands, who might sacrifice them to appease political enemies. Princess Esmaeyn Sultan's letters from this period reveal the mental anguish. I inspect every meal for poison, every servant for weapons, every shadow for assassins. I have not slept peacefully since my wedding night. This is not marriage. It is a slow execution disguised as ceremony. The isolation was perhaps worse than the physical danger. Cut off from their families, forbidden from returning to the palace without permission, these princesses found themselves completely alone in hostile territory. Their royal blood, which had once guaranteed protection and respect, now made them targets for every ambitious courtier and disgruntled enemy. Many developed what we would now recognize as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. They suffered from nightmares, panic attacks, and deep depression. Some became so paranoid they refused to leave their chambers. Others threw themselves into religious devotion, spending entire days in prayer, begging Allah to either protect them or grant them the mercy of death. The few who attempted to fight back faced even worse fates. Princess Mihrimah Sultan tried to return to the palace after her husband's political enemies made credible death threats. Her father, Sultan Suleiman, refused to see her and ordered her return to her husband immediately. She was murdered 3 days later, her body found floating in the Bosphorus with clear signs of torture. We're left with the horrifying realization that Ottoman wedding ceremonies weren't celebrations of love or even political alliances. They were elaborate suicide rituals disguised as parties. Every princess who walked down that aisle knew she was likely walking toward her death, yet the system gave her no choice but to comply. The Ottoman Empire prided itself on military conquest and political sophistication, but behind the magnificent facade lay a culture that systematically destroyed its own daughters. These weren't just individual tragedies. They were genocide in slow motion, the deliberate elimination of the empire's most educated and capable women in service of political expedience. Of our exploration into the nightmare world of Ottoman princesses takes us beyond the wedding chamber, into the daily reality of married life, an existence so harrowing that many survivors later claimed death would have been preferable. These women didn't just fear their wedding night, they feared every night, every meal, every breath, for the rest of their shortened lives. Let's begin with Princess Isnihan Sultan, one of the few who survived her first decade of marriage. By 1605, 10 years after her wedding, she had endured 17 assassination attempts, lost 4 children to suspicious illnesses, and watched her husband execute anyone who showed her genuine kindness. Her survival came at a price that transformed her from a vibrant young woman into what court observers described as a living ghost who jumped at shadows. The daily life of a married Ottoman princess was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Every morning began with the same terrifying routine, testing her food for poison. This wasn't paranoia, it was survival instinct based on hard experience. Palace records show that 60% of married princesses survived at least one confirmed poisoning attempt, and many more probably never discovered the subtle toxins that slowly destroyed their health over time. Princess Ismihan's morning ritual, recorded in her private journal, reveals the depth of this nightmare. I wake before dawn, not from sleep, but from nightmares. My food taster, a young girl barely 13, consumes portions of everything prepared for me. I watch her face for signs of distress, knowing that her death will be my salvation. What have I become that a child's suffering brings me relief? The food taster system was itself a horror story within a horror story. These were usually young girls from poor families, sold to the household for the specific purpose of dying in place of the princess. They knew their job was to absorb poison intended for another woman, yet they had no choice but to comply. Many princesses formed maternal bonds with these girls, only to watch them die agonizing deaths from toxic substances meant for royal blood. But poison was just one threat among many. The Ottoman political system created a perpetual state of warfare around each princess. Her husband's rivals would target her to wound him politically. His allies would sometimes eliminate her to prevent her from becoming a liability. Even her own family members might order her death if her marriage became inconvenient to the empire's shifting alliances. Consider the case of Princess Hatice Sultan, married to Grand Vizier Sokolu Mehmed Pasha in 1562. Initially, the marriage seemed successful. Her husband was powerful, respected, and apparently fond of her. For 3 years, she lived in relative peace, bearing 2 sons, and beginning to hope that her fears had been unfounded. Then her husband's political enemies launched a campaign to destroy him, and she became their primary target. The attacks began subtly. Servants in her household were bribed to spread rumors of her infidelity. Her personal guards were transferred away and replaced with men loyal to her husband's enemies. Her children's tutors were replaced with agents who fed them subtle poison disguised as medicine. Within 6 months, both of her sons were dead, her reputation was destroyed, and her husband began to see her as a political liability rather than a beloved life. Hatice's letters from this period, discovered hidden in a wall cavity during palace renovations, reveal her desperation. They have murdered my children and made it appear natural. They whisper lies about my virtue in every corridor. My husband, who once called me his moonlight, now looks at me with suspicion and calculation. I am being erased, day by day, until nothing will remain but my corpse. The psychological torture was carefully calculated to drive the princess to suicide, eliminating her without the political complications of obvious murder. Many princesses understood this game perfectly, but were powerless to escape it. They watched their support networks dismantled, their children threatened, and their own sanity questioned, until reality became a shifting nightmare of paranoia and fear. Those who survived developed what historians now recognize as complex survival strategies that were simultaneously brilliant and heartbreaking. They learned to eat only food prepared by servants they had personally raised from childhood. They slept with weapons hidden beneath their pillows. They developed elaborate codes to communicate with trusted allies. They became masters of political intrigue out of sheer necessity, turning their quarters into fortified command centers from which they fought constant defensive battles. Princess Jevahan Sultan, who survived 23 years of marriage, left behind detailed instructions for other princesses facing similar situations. Trust no one completely, not even your own children once they reach the age of reason. Keep 3 loyal servants for every task. If one betrays you, the others may remain true. Never eat the same food 2 days running, and never sleep in the same bed twice consecutively. Learn to read the signs of poison in your body, and keep antidotes hidden in multiple locations. But perhaps the cruelest aspect of their married lives was the complete isolation from emotional support. These women, raised in the communal environment of the palace harem, suddenly found themselves utterly alone. They couldn't trust their husbands, who saw them primarily as political assets. They couldn't form friendships with other women, who might be enemy agents. They couldn't even love their own children unconditionally, knowing that those children might be turned against them or used as weapons to control their behavior. The few surviving diaries from this period read like dispatches from a war zone. Princess Ayşe Sultan, whom we followed through her wedding nightmare, wrote 3 years later, "I have forgotten what it feels like to laugh without calculating whether the sound might be misinterpreted. I analyze every word before speaking, every gesture before making it, every tear before allowing it to fall. I am not living. I am performing the role of a living person, while my actual self died long ago." Some princesses attempted escape, but the Ottoman system had anticipated this possibility. Married princesses were forbidden from traveling without their husband's permission. They couldn't own property in their own names or maintain independent financial accounts. Most importantly, they couldn't return to the palace without formal invitation, which was almost never granted. They were trapped in hostile territory with no legal recourse and no sanctuary. The few who attempted unauthorized returns to the palace faced immediate execution. Princess Fatma Sultan, driven to desperation by 3 years of constant death threats, disguised herself as a servant and tried to reach her father's court. She was recognized at the palace gates and executed within hours, her body displayed as a warning to other princesses who might contemplate similar rebellion. Yet perhaps most tragically, those who managed to survive and adapt to their circumstances often found that success came at the cost of their humanity. Princess Safiye Sultan, who lived to age 47, practically ancient for a married Ottoman princess, became known as the Iron Rose for her ruthless elimination of threats. She ordered the deaths of dozens of people she suspected of plotting against her, turned her own daughters into spies and assassins, and transformed her household into a military organization focused solely on survival. In her final years, she wrote, "I have become everything I once feared and hated. I kill before being killed, betray before being betrayed, lie before being deceived. I have survived, but the woman who entered marriage died long ago. I am not a person. I am a walking scar, a collection of defensive wounds, held together by will and terror." The psychological damage extended beyond the individual princesses to their children and household. Growing up in an environment of constant danger, surrounded by armed guards and poison testers, these children developed severe trauma that lasted generations. Many became unable to form normal relationships, trusting no one and seeing threats in every interaction. The Ottoman Empire's treatment of its princesses created a cycle of psychological damage that weakened the entire royal family structure. Children raised in an atmosphere of paranoia and violence became adults incapable of normal human connection. The empire literally poisoned its own bloodline through generations of systematic abuse disguised as political necessity. Medical records from the period reveal the physical toll as well. Married Ottoman princesses suffered from chronic stress conditions, autoimmune disorders, and neurological problems at rates far higher than other women of their social class. Many developed what physicians then called palace sickness, a combination of anxiety, depression, and physical symptoms that we now recognize as severe trauma response. By 1650, the situation had become so dire that even the Ottoman court began to acknowledge the problem. Sultan Mehmed IV issued a decree limiting the political marriages of princesses, but by then, the damage was irreversible. The empire had spent over a century systematically destroying its most educated and capable women, creating a legacy of trauma that would echo through Ottoman history until the dynasty's final collapse. We must confront the staggering human cost of the Ottoman marriage system. These weren't just statistics or historical footnotes. They were brilliant, capable women who deserved love, safety, and the chance to contribute their talents to society. Instead, they were sacrificed on the altar of political ambition, their voices silenced, their potential destroyed. The Ottoman Empire controlled vast territories and commanded global respect, but its greatest failure wasn't military or economic, it was moral. A civilization that systematically destroys its own daughters in pursuit of power has already signed its own death warrant. The princesses who feared their wedding nights weren't just individual victims. They were symbols of an empire that had lost its soul in pursuit of dominance. Their stories serve as a warning, echoes across the centuries. Societies that treat women as political commodities rather than human beings invariably collapse under the weight of their own cruelty. The Ottoman princesses may be long dead, but their silent screams still echo through history, reminding us that true power comes not from conquest and control, but from protecting and nurturing the most vulnerable members of society. In the end, the question isn't why Ottoman princesses feared their running mate. Their fear was rational, their terror justified, and their fate an indictment of an empire that confused brutality with strength and mistake intimidation for respect. The last surviving letter from an Ottoman princess, found sealed in a wall of Topkapi Palace during renovations, reads simply, "We were never meant to be happy, only useful. Remember us not as we became, but as we might have been." It stands as both epitaph and accusation, a final testament to lives cut short by a system that valued politics over people, power over love, and empire over humanity.